Hello, lovely people. It's Onoje Simeon, and welcome again to EcoLead. Now, with the growing or increasing eco-anxiety among young people, I don't know if you're aware, but a lot of young people are getting really anxious about climate change and all the consequences of climate change. And what I intend to do today is to share a story about how we almost lost the bald eagle. You know the bald eagle? The national symbol of the United States of America. How we almost lost that glorious bird to a chemical known as DDT. And I wouldn't just say DDT because I'm in the mood to annoy you today. So I'm going to I'm going to say the full name, the full meaning of DDT is dichloro diphenyl trichloroethane. Now you see why we don't always say the full name right. We prefer saying PFAS, PBDs, and things like that to save you the headache. Now, but the story is one of the most, I think it's been described as one of the greatest success stories of how human action can positively bring about environmental change. And I don't know if you've heard about DDT before, but as someone who is coming from a developing country, I have used DDT a lot. Maybe not called DDT directly, but chemicals that contain DDT. And so if you're coming from a country like Nigeria where mosquitoes are a bit of a headache, you would sometimes resort to some chemicals that are not very palatable. And I remember using some of those chemicals to kill mosquitoes and roaches and all sorts of nasty insects. And one strange thing about that chemical is you apply it, and for days, actually, insects like mosquitoes will stay far away from where you've applied it. And that's why some people have actually described DDT as a miracle chemical. That word or that name, chemical, miracle chemical, actually can be traced back to the role DDT played in the Second World War. During the First World War, over 50 million people died to typhus. And it was DDT, largely to DDT, that situation did not repeat itself in the Second World War. There were stories of civilians and soldiers being air sprayed with DDT to stop the spread of typhus and other diseases. I think I read a specific instance of a town in Italy where soldiers and the Allied force were actually sprayed with DDT to stem the imminent spread or outbreak of typhus at that time. Shortly after the Second World War, the miracle chemical was applied to everything. They were using it to control pests, to stop spread of diseases among plants and all of that. It became a very standard pesticide. And even as I speak, in some parts of the world, people still rely on DDT for a lot of things. And now, prior to the discovery of DDT, I mean humans, relied more on more toxic and more persistent chemicals, arsenic compounds, and some other natural chemicals that were gotten from plants that were being used as pesticides at that time wouldn't last as long. So that feature of it being persistent, being able to linger for long, was one of the advantages that made it very special, because if you apply it, you wouldn't need to apply again for a while, and then it just keep acting and repelling insects. Another advantage of DDT at the time of discovery was that it was toxic to pests and to insects, but humans, it was less toxic. So it was the go-to thing. It was a miracle discovery. It was just the thing to have at that time. And so it spread across the world like wildfire after the Second World War. But not too long after then, people started noticing, scientists started observing or seeing some effects of these pollutants in the environment. And one of the first voices that actually expressed the adverse impact of DDT was the work of Rachel Carson, who wrote that book. That I think the title of the book is as important as what the book talked about, Silent Spring. And what she was talking about, because she studied the impact of DDT on birds and other animals. And the title of the book actually stems from tries to picture a scenario where we would have springs without the songs of birds. And that's what she meant by that. That title made it easy for people to relate to it. So what she was saying is, if we continue on the path of using this pollutant the way we're using it, we'll get to a point where there will be no more bird songs in spring. Nobody wanted that. I don't know about you, but every time I spend some time in the wild, it's the songs of those beautiful birds that actually refreshes me more than any other thing. And so when she titled that book Silent Spring and talked about the impact of those pollutants on birds and other wild animals, I think people actually related more with it, and that led to outrage and conversations that eventually led to the ban of DDTs. Now, something else she exposed was the concept of bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and I'll do my best to put it in the simplest words possible. Now, these pollutants, when they get into the tissue of lower animals, this, for instance, you have earthworm or the other smaller organisms that would first of all come into contact with these pollutants when it is used on plants and other things that it's being used for. So, for instance, you apply it on your farm as a pesticide, or you use it to kill insects. There's rainfall that is washed into water bodies that would have first impact on the lower organisms like earthworms and all the other smaller things. Now, if, just as an illustration, one earthworm is exposed to, say, 2 parts per billion or whatever. Let me use a simpler term. So let's assume that you expose an earthworm to a single grain, like a sugar grain of that contaminant. That finds its way into the earthworm. So that's one earthworm. So you have 10 earthworms eating 10 of those grains. Now, if fish comes along, typically fishes will eat up to 4 or 5 of those earthworms. So in that fish now, you're looking at about 3 or 4 or 5 of those grains, depending on how many earthworms that fish has eaten. Now, the concept of bioaccumulation is, in its natural form or with natural chemicals, the body would be able to get rid of those toxic substances through, urination or sweating or feces or whatever. But bioaccumulative compounds are such that the body is not able to get rid of them as fast as they come back in. So if you had 2 come in and the body gets rid of 1, you still have 1 accumulating. And so that's how bioaccumulation works. Now, biomagnification, that fish has eaten 5 earthworms. What that means is the concentration of that pollutant has increased in that small fish. That fish gets eaten by a bigger fish, and because it's a bigger fish, it will end up eating, say, 4, 5, 10 of those fishes. And so you see there is a magnification of the concentration of the contaminant as it goes up the food chain. So by the time it gets to the bald eagle, you already have a very serious situation and a very high concentration that will begin to have serious impact on the eagles. And one of the first observations was scientists, through some very serious effort, would go and collect eggs of those bald eagles over a very long period of time. And they were looking at those eggs yearly. And what they found was thinning of the shells of the eggs. And what that meant was the eggs were becoming thinner, the shells were becoming thinner. And so when the birds sit on the eggs to incubate, the eggs would break. What that meant was you had the grown ones dying out, and since not many eggs are hatching, you don't have the population being replaced. So that led to a dramatic drop in the number of this glorious bird, the national symbol of the United States of America. Now, looking at some numbers, at the time when America adopted the bald eagle as its national symbol, that was in 1782. Account says that we had about 100,000 nesting bald eagles at that time. In one of the states in Michigan, the population of these bald eagles dropped to just 52 breeding pairs by 1961. And so Michigan became the first state to introduce a ban in 1969. This was then followed by a national ban. That was about 3 years later, and that would be 1978. And so that meant that things started changing. And following this ban, scientists could actually show a gradual decline in the concentration of DDT in the environment over time. But that's not the only interesting development. Along with that decline in DDT, of course, other measures were put in place. But along with the decline in DDT, there was also a gradual increase or growth in the population of these bald eagles. And so what that meant was that the ban had a direct impact on the recovery of the bald eagle population. And according to data between 2018 and 2019, we had a total of 316,700 individual bald eagles and 71,467 breeding pairs. And in Michigan alone, as of 2019, we already had about 900 breeding pairs. So this story goes to show that we might be facing a lot of challenges now. So you hear about PFAS, you hear about all these chemicals that are threatening human existence, and it feels like the world is about to come to an end. What I intend to achieve with this story is to let you know that we've been through similar phases in the past, and then with human actions like bans and restricted use, we've been able to recover a complete species. I also understand that these actions that I talk about might not necessarily lie on the shoulders of ordinary people like you and I, but we also have a responsibility to put pressure on governments, on those who have the power to make these decisions. We have a responsibility to keep the conversation going and driving the conversation in a certain direction. So hopefully with this story, some anxiety would have been eased, knowing that humanity, humans, you and I, have the power to bring about the change to save our planet. Thank you for watching. See you soon.